Hello, everyone, and welcome to Randy Mazzuca Goes to Peru, a fresh new adventure to a different part of a country that has become very dear and near to my heart. It must mean a lot to me, or I wouldn't have gone twice in 4 months. As many of you remember, I went to Peru in September for my Earthwatch trip, but this one is unrelated to Earthwatch. This was me going to visit my colleagues at Speckled Bear Conservation in a whole different part of Peru to see their work with my own eyes. The green circle is Iquitos in the Amazon, where I went first, and the orange circle is in the dry western coast of Peru in the foothills of the Andes, where I went this time. And just because people might have that in the back of their minds, the red circle is where all the protests were. Far, far from me. The bears that SBC studies are speckled bears, also known as Andean bears. These medium sized bears get their name from the distinct white markings around their eyes. Sometimes they just look wispy, and sometimes they look like full raccoon masks, but when they wrap around just right, they resemble eyeglasses. Spectral bears are the only bears in South America, found in Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and of course, Peru. The bears can be found in three types of ecosystems: the high open grasslands at 11,000 feet, the tropical cloud forest at 3,000 feet, and a very rare isolated population in the dry forests of northern Peru. The purple lines are where the core distribution of Peruvian speckled bears can be found in the cloud forests and high grasslands, but the red lines are an isolated population found in lowlands of the dry forest and a bit in the first two high ecosystems that you'd expect to find them. The open environment makes it easier to see the bears, but the living conditions are brutal. Temperatures can reach around 100 degrees, and as humans studying them, navigating the dry terrain of cliffs, rocks, and thorny plant life can be difficult to say the least. However, the bears are well adapted to move throughout the landscape with ease. They're known for their rock climbing prowess, thanks to sharp claws and lankier limbs than other bears, which makes it easier for them to creep down steep cliff walls in search of snails and mushrooms or just to cut across the mountainous countryside. During the Peruvian summers, the bears rely on a fruit called sapote to fatten themselves up. The trees are found throughout the region, and the bears will come down in the mornings to feast before retreating back to higher ground. In the Peruvian winters, the bears won't hibernate, but they will slow down. Pasayo trees become a new foundation for their diet, and the bears will lazily stay around the same tree for weeks, gnawing away like a beaver until there's nothing left but matchsticks. Like most bear species, they mostly eat vegetation, fruits, and flowers, but they do have meat on the menu. It's a small amount and will mostly come from scavenging, but they do eat it. Speckled bear conservation started in 2007 when a young bear conservationist from Canada named Robin Appleton arrived on the scene to study what is still known as the least studied bear in the world. She connected with wildlife tracker Javier Vallejos, a man who had been a hunter but was also known as the best animal tracker in the region, helping people throughout northern Peru find their lost livestock. Together, they hiked through the dry forests of the Andes before spotting Laura, the first bear SBC studied and the first bear in Peru to be fitted with a GPS collar. For years, they have lived amongst the bears, collecting data and carrying on the mission as the organization has continued to grow. I first crossed paths with SBC in 2014 when I was working for the Wildlife Conservation Network, an organization that partners with the biggest and best conservationists on the planet to provide support for their independent operations. SBC had just joined our network, and I was immediately enchanted by these handsome bears in a region different from the Africa centric work I was used to. As a social media manager for WCN, they were always one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Since then, I've had my own social media career take off, doing work for pangolins and filling in from time to time at WCN. But for my birthday, I like to use my skills to do a fundraising campaign of my own for conservation groups that mean the most to me. In 2022, I raised more than $2,000 for SBC, and along the way, I just happened to ask if they would like my help running their social media, which they were happy to have. In my whole career, I've never been one to ask for favors or special treatment. Just having a role in the SBC team was already a dream come true. But Robin herself had insisted that I had to come down and visit. She wanted me to experience their corner of Peru myself and see everything with my own eyes and meet the team because it would make my job as a messenger even more powerful. So a few days after I got back from my first Peru trip, I was booked for another. I departed from SFO in the middle of January and made the 2 day trip back to Peru. And just because I know everyone is waiting to hear this, I had no trouble with my suitcase this time. I arrived at the SBC Conservation Center in Baton Grande, which is about an hour from the coast. The center has an office, living spaces, a full kitchen, storage space, and facilities for their Felty program, which is something I'm going to talk about later. After years of spectacled bear posts and dreaming of being in Peru to experience myself, I was there. They had me out in the field the first day I got in, and I quickly got acquainted with what it feels like to be in the dry forest. This is the definition of a no man's land. We drove out of town to get to their research site, and besides a few true ranchers, it's not really a place for tourists. The temperature is roasting, and the trails are less like trails and more like a wilderness to cut through. I'd trusted our legendary guide Javier that no one had died going this way. Looking back now, I laugh at how much this dumb little afternoon trip beat me up. I didn't know at the time that I hadn't seen anything yet. We were going out to change the memory card on the trail camera, and SBC staff member Irina told me that this was an easy trail. There was also one other newcomer with me named Allie, who is a volunteer from Canada who is a park ranger. I'm not that much of a hiker, so she was my gauge the whole time for whether they were asking a lot of us, and she since didn't seem that bothered, so I decided to brace myself for a whole lot more. And the next day, I would be given an opportunity to test my good attitude and also the months of working out I'd been doing to be ready for whatever might be thrown at me. I should say I trained really, really, really hard for my Earthwatch trip because I thought that would be difficult. That ended up not being very hard at all, but this was more like what I expected. Mayascan is a region about 45 minutes away in the opposite direction of the dry forest I was in the day before. As you can see in the picture, the path we would be taking would be about 1,000 feet up to change the camera on a dry waterfall. SBC has about 120 of these trail cameras that they're responsible for, and they each need to be checked 6 times a year. According to them, this is one of the highest cameras they have, but there are still other ones higher up than this. Like most things in life, I just go into them without really understanding what I'm doing, so this was my first time realizing what they were asking me to do. To the untrained eye, you would think it wasn't possible to scale a near vertical wall, but I had a lot of faith in my guide Julio that they do this all the time, so all I could do is follow his lead. One thing I should say about this entire presentation is that nobody really has their camera out during the most extreme and life threatening moments, but I'm also thankful that the team wanted to help me get some publicity shots when they could. This is a perfect example of how steep the climb was. It wasn't a vertical wall climbing, and we don't need equipment, but it was pretty much a 95-degree angle that we were crawling up the entire way. We made it to the top, and I was pleasantly surprised that this was a spot I was pretty familiar with. It was the scene of a few camera trap pictures I'd used over the years or had been in Robin's presentation, so I felt like I'd stepped foot on a film set. The camera was placed here because this was one of the few sources of water on the mountaintop, so it would have plenty of traffic from not just bears, but other wildlife as well. Even if I didn't get to see a bear the entire time I was in Peru, it was a relief to know that we had done all that work for some bear data on the memory card. As you can see from this image, besides just the beautiful picture of a bear, we can also see the temperature, the date, and the time. The raging hot midday sun makes most bears take it easy in the afternoon, and they're most active in the morning and at the evening. 4:30 at night was probably prime time for this bear to come get a drink. Julio recorded the information about the camera for their records and cleaned all the algae and gunk out of the pool. And I also collected some bear hair from a line of barbed wire that was placed there to get genetic samples. I tried to get a good picture of me in this iconic location, but this is as good as it gets. And then we headed back down. This is sliding down, but just imagine that this was what we had just climbed up. We did it. We took it a little bit easier that weekend, taking some time to do some training with the drone. It's good technology to have, but I can imagine that it can't take the place of on the ground footwork to catch all the missing details. I was a little too good at flying the drone because it was exactly like playing a video game, but I didn't tell any of them that. On another day, we went into Chiclayo, the nearby city of 500,000 people, to experience a day in the big city. We went shopping and had ice cream. We even went to the movies. I got to watch it in Spanish with my friends, just like I do in the US every weekend. It was a fun day and a different type of interesting experience for my time in Peru. I'm glad we took it easy because the next day we found out about challenge number 2. 2 days, 2 nights in Patino. That morning, Ali and I were sat down and told to get ready because we were going to be going out to the field for 2 days and 2 nights. This was the big adventure of my entire trip and really a dream come true as someone who wanted to experience field conservation. All of our necessary supplies would have to be walked into the field on our backs, and we were only allowed about a grocery bag full of personal items like a toothbrush, sunscreen, and clothes to sleep in. No one was trying to be mean or scare us like they would to me at boot camp. It was just the logistics of the situation that we were entering into a difficult environment. And this was the way that we would all survive out there. The food we'd each be carrying was ramen, some potato starch, fruit, oatmeal, raisins, cans of tuna, and the most backbreaking of all, 6 2.5 liter bottles of water in each of our bags. Altogether, it probably weighed about 50 pounds. We loaded everything up into the Land Cruiser and took pictures of our team as we departed. I got a little sense that this is going to be a big deal when everyone wanted to take all these before pictures of us. The team consisted of myself, Ali, Julio, the man who I had climbed up the waterfall with in Mayascan, and the legendary Javier, who is the man that had helped Robin start SBC all those years ago, and also the brilliant biologist Carmen. Some people might be afraid of what was out there in the wilderness, but I knew we had Carmen with us, and she was tougher than any jaguar, puma, or meat hungry bear we might encounter. We drove out much further than we usually did whenever we entered this region. Usually it would be about 30 minutes from town, but this time it felt like more than an hour. Maybe that's just in my head, but it certainly felt like we were going a lot farther from civilization. The field site we were visiting truly is more extreme than anywhere else I'd been. The heat was hotter, the trees and cactuses were more thorny, spiny, and dense, and there's no shortage of ankle rolling rocks of all shapes and sizes. This was the hard route that Irina had warned me about. There are reasons that people don't live or play out here, so for us to be going in to stay for any amount of time truly is an act of endurance. It was like entering the surface of another planet. We were dropped off and sent away with a hero's farewell. I'm not saying I was traumatized, but I really don't know at the time what I was getting into. The act of putting on our backpacks on it all took some figuring out, especially on this first day when everything was at its most full. We walked for about an hour across the open plains with my straps digging into my shoulders before having to climb up to our campsite. I will admit, climbing what was probably the only that was probably the only time I said I didn't think I could do something. Not that I gave up or was upset. I just literally wasn't sure for a moment that I could get me and the backpack up but with some encouragement from the team and my mantra that I had asked for this experience, I made it up. As the sun went down, we set up our tents and made tuna ramen for dinner. The next morning, we set out to find the bears. Remember how I said that during the most extreme moments of this trip, no one had their camera out? We were just trying to get through the moment. But I've cobbled together some footage from our SBC group chat to show some examples of what kind of hiking this is. These aren't well worn trails or recreational hikes. This is us following in the footsteps that SBC had been walking for more than a decade. After we got back, I asked Ali, the park ranger from Canada, who was my gauge for how crazy this stuff was, if this was just a typical hiking experience and if I was just the indoor kid who didn't know any better. And she said, "Oh, no, no, no. This was definitely very hard. Even in the morning, it was roasting hot, and it only got worse as the day went on." As she pointed out, back home in North America, if it's 95 degrees, they call it a heat advisory and tell people to stay home. But we were just hiking right through it. The location we were marching towards was Cerro Chiperi, which is an iconic location in the world of SBC. Every morning, the bears descended from the mountaintop to feed and find water in the valley before returning to the top. This would be our best chance to see the bears with our own eyes. Anyone who knows and cares about SBC has had big dreams about being in Peru and spotting these unique bears as they crawl across a cliffside. It's been staples of Robin's presentations, highlights of documentaries, and the subject of viral clips. Now it was my turn to be one of the few people to see them in the wild. One of our missions of this entire expedition, besides just checking the camera traps, was to try and find female bears. At the moment, the population dynamics are dangerously off kilter. There are far more males than females, and the cubs that are born have about a 30 to 40% survival rate. It's possible that we may just be documenting a population going extinct, but there's still hope. The cubs are given a stronger chance for survival thanks to land purchases by SBC that give the mom and cubs better access to food sources like sapote trees so that they can produce the milk that babies need to survive. Spectral bears are only with their mom for about 18 months before they're independent, a pretty short amount of time compared to some other bears. If more female cubs can make it to adulthood and reproduce with the males in the area, it would give the bears of the dry forest a fighting chance. From where we were, it was hard to say if there were any new females, but we certainly did see bear activity like males trailing females and a mom with cubs. I can't say I got a great view of the bears, but I did see them with my own eyes for just a moment, even if they did just look like tiny black caterpillars, and that was better than nothing at all. I'm one of the few people in the world who have seen speckled bears in their dry forest habitat. We returned back to camp and packed up to relocate to another site to get closer access to the other side of the valley. The first campsite is where we stayed the first night to get to the overlook point to look at the bears on the other side of the valley. After we got done with that, we packed up our campsite to get to the second site, which was literally just beneath the overlook site. I'm not saying we didn't have to take the long way. The logistics and the geography gave us no choice, but I'm just saying we had a really long hike to get to campsite number 2. After a day of drinking nothing but boiling water to quench my thirst and pushing myself to the limits, I would have given anything to have a cold Pepsi waiting for me on that mountaintop. But instead, all we had to look forward to was the sun going down and bugs coming out. But this was a sink or swim adventure that I had asked for. The next morning, we trekked across the valley to the one watering hole in the area and parked ourselves, hoping to see the bears up close. The bears can go about 3 days without drinking water, so we were hoping that today was our day. But after a few hours, we did have to accept that it wasn't. I would like to say that we had an up close experience with the bears, but I feel like I was just so exhausted and I was trying so hard to keep my head up and my eyes open that the universe decided I didn't really deserve it, so the bears didn't come for us. We still had a mission out there to check the camera, so we made our way down to the dry waterfall to see what we could find. To our surprise, we did find something interesting. One of the bears had actually destroyed the camera, which is something that they never do. It's hard to say why they did that, if it was curiosity or just bears acting weird in breeding season, but either way, the camera would need to be switched out. The memory card was still salvageable, and we were able to find some pictures of some potential suspects for this blatant act of vandalism. Criminals, all of them. After lunch, we packed up camp and made the final march back to our pickup point. We'd think that everything would be lighter now that we'd consumed it, but there wasn't too much of a weight difference, and we were good environmentalists who carried out all the trash that we brought in. It was still the late afternoon, so the heat was cooking. Our water was all boiling, and we were naturally exhausted. This was when I felt the most like a cartoon character in a desert that was going to collapse mid-step. This is one of the final times that we stopped to rest, and I took this picture about 10 minutes after I really felt like I could just drift away from heat exhaustion. I was sitting in a pile of cow manure in the shade because it was cooler than the hot rocks around us. I was already a mess, and it's not like I could feel any grosser. You'd think that I was miserable and that I regretted going out there. In a way, at that moment, I kind of did, but I also know how harsh experiences like these work. You don't go through life feeling proud or changed by doing things that were easy. They have to actually be hard at the time, but you live through it, and then it becomes a streamlined story that just stays with you forever. Fortunately for me, I would live to tell the tale. We made it all the way to the end, and the team picking us up knew exactly what I was hoping for: a cold Pepsi, which was the best Pepsi I've ever had in my entire life. After having a day to recover, I mustered up more energy to visit one more region the SBC works in the highlands at 11,000 feet. The area is like a whole other country, much more green, cool, and wet. But the people and the colors of the region were a true Peruvian experience, and it was nice to learn that I don't get altitude sickness. The local men of the Tucto village took me out to their lake and we went fishing. SBC works closely with these people, showing them how to fight fires, manage the landscape, and teach the local women how to make and sell felties, a handcrafted figurine made from wool, which is a whole other half of SBC's work besides conservation. I could do a whole presentation about this, but in a nutshell, this award winning program is changing lives by giving local women the chance to make an income for the first time in their lives and support their families in ways that were never offered to them before. My time in Peru had come to an end for now, but it will stay with me forever. It was life changing, like going to boot camp or some of my hardest trips out to sea. It was an honor to be invited to come along for the work that these heroes do on a regular basis, and it has given me even more respect for their stories that I'm passing on to the world on our social media. But I was just a guest. In the Coast Guard, we called people who went on just one underway trip and bragged about it forever shipwriters, when really we were the ones who risked it all by going out to sea routinely. In this instance, I felt like I was just a shipwriter of the dry forest. The staff at SBC are the tough ones who have dedicated their lives to being in the field and are acting as stewards of the land, the wildlife, and the people of Peru. They're a respected organization that is making an impact for the future. Spectral bears continue to be the least studied bear in the world, and there's still much, much more work to be done. But with enough support, we can give the bears hope for the future, thanks to the best team of people that I can imagine. If you would like to learn more and support the work of speckled bear conservation, go to sbcperu.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.